Good morning everyone, Jackie Broman here for TBA Law. Join Jackie on Mondays. Very chilly this morning, feeling the cold, feeling fairly blue and icy, but it's sort of going to be one of these lovely clear days now that we've had that morning. Today I'm here to talk about aged care bonds. So the technical name for them these days, they used to be called a bond. Now they're a refundable accommodation deposit. So you can call them a RAD. So I guess there's a couple of things about them that I wanted to talk about. So this is when someone is going into aged care, the amount that they have to pay to go in, which is usually assessed based on their assets and their income. If people are below a certain asset threshold, people can go in a public system, but there's usually at least a portion that needs to be paid. And then if you want to go where you choose, the assessment amount can be a whole lot more. But this is usually going into a aged care accommodation. This is not a retirement village. This is not assisted living. This is into a facility that actually provides care. It can still be a low level of care, but it is care anyway. There's a couple of different elements to how aged care is funded. So there's the bond that's paid, and we call that the refundable accommodation deposit. So that gets put away and invested by the aged care facility, and the interest is used, and very rarely does much of it actually get eaten into. And then there's a daily fee as well. So a person going into aged care, as well as paying a deposit, usually pays a daily rate as well. If you don't want to pay the bond, you can choose to pay a higher daily rate. So there is that choice. Now, what I highly recommend to people when they are looking at getting their loved ones into aged care or going in themselves, to actually not only have the aged care assessment, but speak to a financial planner who specialises in aged care, so you can actually work out what is best. A lot of people are really worried at this stage about whether the house will be counted as an asset and whether they have to sell the house to go into aged care. But realistically, it's at that point that they need to be assessing, with the help of someone who can advise financially, which way is best to go, whether it is best to sell the house or not. And removing some of the emotional sentimentality around the house as well. Quite often elderly people are really quite worried that if the house is sold, then they have no asset, but the lump sum goes into an investment and most of that comes back to the family. So the value of it is still retained and comes back. It's not like it disappears. So quelling that worry is sometimes half the battle. But there's also a misunderstanding about whether it's more financially sound to hold on to an asset which then doesn't earn any income versus selling it and not having to maintain that house or the family maintain it. In some situations, the house is not counted, and so having the help from a financial planner about working out when the house should be counted or not is very important. So those are the elements about generally how aged care is paid for, and sort of having that assessment done and getting support around that. And then what happens after someone passes away, or if you're lending the money to your mum or dad, for example, to go into aged care. So the aged care deposit is considered the money of the person going in. So when it is paid back, it is paid back to the estate of the person who's just passed away. So if mum or dad go into aged care, the money comes back to their estate. So if another family member has lent the money to that person to go into aged care, there needs to be a loan or a record that that's happened, because the money is paid back to the estate. It's not paid back to the person whose money it originally was. the aged care deposit is recorded in the name of the person who is in care, not in the name of the person who lends the money or pays the money if it's not that person's directly, if that makes sense. So make sure that there's loan agreements in place so that the estate actually has to pay it back to the person who lent the money to mum or dad or whomever it is who's gone into aged care. If there is no loan agreement in place, then the money does come into the estate and it forms part of all the other assets that are in their estate just to go in accordance with the will. So there really does have to be a loan agreement if that money is not originally that person's money. Then the other thing about actually getting the bond money back. So it's part of the regulations for aged care that they shouldn't release that bond back to the estate without a grant of probate. So the executor will have to go through that process to get that grant. And then within 2 weeks of the aged care facility being served a copy of the grant of probate, they have to return the money. If they don't, then they can start incurring some interest. So, and the interest is quite high, so there is a penalty if they don't return that promptly. But they don't have to return it earlier. Very few of them will, because like I said, it is in their regulations that they should get a grant of probate before releasing those funds back. So there you are, a little bit about aged care bonds, which are now actually called refundable accommodation deposits, so a RAD. So we talked initially about how to pay for aged care, and you've got your daily rate and your bond. You can opt to pay a higher daily rate if you don't pay the bond, and how the bond is assessed and getting financial support around how to raise that money and whether it's right to sell a house to go in or have the money lent to them by someone else. If the money is being lent, make sure there is a deed of loan to come into place, because then once that person passes away and the refundable deposit is paid back to the estate, if it's not that person's original funds and they have to be paid back to someone who lent the funds to get into aged care, that needs to be documented. All right, so a few tips there around aged care. Please reach out if you have any other questions. There are a few great financial planners around who specifically work in the area of aged care, because it is quite complex, and working out the various arrangements, and certainly where there is a couple still and one of them goes into care and then the next one goes into care, working out the timing of that can also be crucial, because you can bring the aged care deposit amount right down depending on that timing. So prior planning is really important. Yes, so I hope this is helpful. If you think it would help anyone else you know, please comment and tag the person's name in the comments there. Or if it is private, you can share it with them via Messenger. As I said before, any other queries you may have, contact me directly. I can set you up with a financial planner who deals with this or point you in the right direction. And otherwise, if this has raised any other questions for you, let me know. I can address them in another Facebook Live. I do this every Monday. While they're live, these videos do get saved onto the page. By all means, go back and have a look at some of the old ones if they're relevant, but happy to take requests and I can answer any questions that you have. All right. Happy Monday. I'll catch you again next week. Stay warm and stay safe.